Okay, we are live now.
Hey, Dr. Joe.
Hey, Lisa.
Okay, now I'm going to try and make that the last time I call you doctor.
Okay, that's great.
I'm going to try.
Okay, we're going to take a few minutes to share, people, as usual, and we'll be back soon. Hi, Dolores. And we're not actually going anywhere, we're just going to share. I think the internet's a bit slow tonight.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a hard time getting in.
Yeah, there was a lot of storm around here just about a half hour ago.
We had storm, but it cleared out over an hour and a half ago, I think.
We're not really too far from each other.
Where are you at?
We're
in Virginia.
Yeah, Northern Virginia, just a little to the west of D.C., about 40 miles to the west of D.C.
So, Joe, are you sharing this out on Twitter?
No, I'm sharing this out on the Facebook. There are some people helping, though.
Oh, okay.
Sharing it out. We'll be sharing it out on Twitter and sharing it out, on YouTube. But what I'm doing now is sharing it out to a bunch of Facebook groups. And lots and lots of Facebook groups to share it out to. Had to click 3 times on that last group to get it shared out. Okay, I think that's enough for the time being. We'll have help from other people.
Okay.
I think that's enough for the time being. Okay, I was hearing an echo there.
Yeah, I found the YouTube channel, so I'm sharing this out on Twitter now.
I see. Okay. Okay, when you look into the interface on StreamYard, it should give you the people watching on all the channels. Hi, Dolores. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing. Hi, Kay. It's great to see you. And Evelina, hello. You're here really early tonight. That's great. And Kay says hi to Evelina. Evelina says hi, sweet Kay. And Dolores says hi, everyone from Facebook. I'm sorry, from YouTube. I'm actually comes in and shares both on Facebook and on YouTube and on Twitter.
Nice.
So she is omnipresent and a great help.
Thank you so much, everybody who's sharing. We're going quiet here.
We're going to start off. So, the way I thought we'd start is with you asking me questions about MMT.
Okay.
And then I thought that we could do that for a while. But before we do, okay, I'd like to give you a chance to give some background on yourself and how you came to the Red Berets and why you're such a very hard fighter for the Red Berets. And hello there, Amber. Great to see you.
So I have a background that's extensive in, I don't know, public accounting, auditing, federal tax consultant, and then I was a banker for quite a few years at a bank that went into receivership during the crash. And long story, but I had to make a decision about what I was going to do with my life after that, because it was anybody that was on the inside of finance during that crash was pretty crippled from the devaluation of the properties, their jobs, and then trying to find work when you had so many high financiers on the streets of the towns that all of that went down with. So I took some time after all of that. I traveled with my sister and my daughter for a couple of weeks, and I came home. And my husband's father was a HR specialist, headhunter type guy for a long time. And he said, well, Lisa, what color is your parachute? Which, if you're not familiar, that's a book from very, very long ago.
I'm familiar with that book.
And it just, I didn't read it all. I skimmed through it. But it was really poignant that you have to find your passion. What moves you? What's important to you? What motivates you? And what do you believe in? And then translate that into what you're going to do for your livelihood and for your career or your job, or however you want to look at it. And I decided that healthcare, in some way, shape, or form, might be something that I could actually do from the finance office, which pigeonholes you to a certain extent until you get to a certain level where you are holding the purse strings and facilitating, ensuring the going concern of your organization is healthy, and you end up being pivotal in the success of how an operation runs. So healthcare seemed like maybe a good segue, taking care of people, because I've always been very empathetic. I believe in taking care of others. Nonprofits sometimes can get sticky. Going to search for the right nonprofit can be really hard. But I just figured, well, let me take a look around in healthcare. And I stumbled over a director of finance position open in a nonprofit hospice out in the state of Washington, out in Kitsap County. And they didn't want to hire me because I was a banker.
Oh, no.
I actually had to ask them, plead with them, to allow me an interview with their leadership team so that they could get to meet me. They could understand why I wanted to do that work and why I was interested in their organization. And I got that interview and I got that job. And from that day forward, I'd always had women that were in my life that were friends of mine that were nurses, but until that point, when I started realizing what hospice was, what hospice nurses had to go through, and it's a calling for them more than anything else. You don't just get a job in hospice because it's difficult. So all of that said, I left that hospice. I moved my family back east and got a job at a home health hospice and adult daycare entity. And while I was doing all of that, I loved it. I loved hospice because the hospice benefit isn't just for the individual, the beneficiary who needs the healthcare services. It really is a wraparound benefit for the family, making sure that they can handle what's going on with their loved one, transitioning them financially with support services, the least of which are not, social workers who they can talk to. We had a chaplain who was a great guy who could work, sit down and work with anyone about any types of spiritual needs that they had, or, just sitting down and talking about the loss that everyone realized was coming. So I did that all through before the ACA, and then I watched as the ACA evolved and what it did to healthcare, how heavily laden it became with administrative expenses, how interrupted the focus, which had always been a patient's plan of care and making sure that our documentation and our quality control standards and everything that had to do with delivering the absolute best care that we possibly could as being our main focus. And I was very involved in that as a finance director, because if your quality is good in that regard, you provide better care and you can train your staff as best you possibly can so that everybody's working together as a group, whether you were a biller, a home health aide, a nurse, a doctor, a social worker, to the end goal, which was to take care of the community that needed us, right? And over the 7 years of implementing the ACA, the focus became very, very skewed. And unfortunately, it had to, because we all of a sudden were credentialing with the latest and greatest insurance provider that was in the region, or regions, right? Getting credentialed with them, training the nurses regarding what hoops you had to jump through in order to stay viable as a provider with a beneficiary that you could bill for, because every insurance entity had their own set of hoops you had to jump through, right? And from a billing perspective, I started to see my revenue getting played with. Like, we would provide services, and 6 months down the road, I would have an entity that had its own audit procedures, and they could electronically come into our bank accounts and take back money and tell us that we had to go through an audit and prove to them that we deserve to be paid.
Oh my God.
Which is a really great tactic if you want to do a hostile takeover now, isn't it? Because if you cash flow constrain your competitors.
Yeah, then you get to take them over a lot easier.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And in the interim, what are you doing? You're taking away needed healthcare providers from your community. All in, and that's on top of all of the denials that we would get. Because when you have new insurance plans coming online with new billing procedures, not only am I new at billing that entity, but their billing processing, their AP processing is also new, right? So you've got errors on both sides of that are costly to work through. So all of that said, I stepped away from healthcare, ended up going to work for the decennial census for a year. And then COVID hit. My son had to be home, virtual school, and he needed me. He needed somebody at home with him. And all along through the years, I had been out on Twitter talking about the absolute need of Medicare for all. I was a big Bernie supporter, big policy person. So, I picked my candidates by their policy. Supported him. And through his first run, where we really believed that we had a hard shot at Medicare for all, I had always been looking at state single payer programs that I knew were fledgling and in the works, and in the hopes of possibly getting through their state house and state senate. But when Bernie came along, I thought, well, we don't have to do this anymore. And here's my thought on state single payer. Once we prove we can do it in one place and show how much money it'll save and show that we can do better care, better outcomes, much more cheaply, right?
Right.
That's a proof, right? That is a proof.
Yes.
And that is why I am such a huge proponent of trying to enact this in states where I believe there could be very successful. And I even became a part, and this is, all along this whole spectrum, I was out tweeting, and one time I ran across Laura, who is so real and genuine out on Twitter and such a good human being who works with nurses out in Washington State, where I had to move from. I moved back to Pennsylvania, where I'm actually from, but I can tell you my whole family is their hearts are in Washington State, right?
I see.
That attracted me to her. She was pushing whole Washington, but she was staunchly always pushing crochet for care, knit for the nurses, the 99%, Roseanne DeMauro, all of that energy from that first presidential run that was much more grassroots driven, much more raw in both content. Yeah. And I started hanging out on her threads, and we just sort of became friends. And one day, a woman by the name of Sema Hernandez was running for Senate.
Oh, yes, I know her. I have interviewed her a couple of times, as a matter of fact. She's wonderful.
Yes, she is. And she had me as her healthcare finance advisor for her first campaign run.
Oh, God.
And she was going to run again.
Know that.
Mm-hmm. And she was going to have a kickoff party down in Texas. And I just was so enamored with what Laura was doing. I'd been hanging out with her at that point for probably 6 or 7 months. And I had never talked to her on the phone, but I thought to myself, wow, you know what? If I could get Laura to pack up some Red Berets and we go down to Sema Hernandez kickoff
great
party, right? Then, and I could take Laura with me. I could meet her, and maybe we could raise some money for her campaign, and it would be great exposure for Laura. Sema's, one of her signature posts, planks in her platform was healthcare, Medicare for all, right?
Yes.
And which healthcare for me, and we've talked about this, Joe, so closely tied to energy, fossil fuels, contaminants in the ground, right?
Absolutely intersectional.
Right. And Sema's in Texas, and there are so many sacrifice zones around oil refineries.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And I can relate to that because I live in Pennsylvania, and right now I'm in Pittsburgh, but out, every state's got its zone, right? You've got Hanford out in Washington State. I grew up with the 3 Mile Island disaster. I used to live in Buffalo, New York. You had, what's the name of the island? Well, I want to say Love Canal, right? Right?
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
My age is
I remember that very well. Bonnie and I actually met and married in Buffalo.
Did you really? I lived in Buffalo for a couple of years.
Yes, I went there in 1965 to work, and we met at Kohl's.
Oh, how neat. That's a great story. So anyhow, long story short.
That's a great story. Someday I'll tell you. That's a great story.
I actually got Laura to give me her phone number. I called her and I said, hey, I know you don't know who I am. What do you think if we get on an airplane and we go down to Texas with some berets and we support the kickoff of Sema Hernandez campaign? And I said, I know this sounds really goofy and you don't know me from Abel, but, and we just planned it out, took the berets, we went down, not thinking that it was going to be like incredibly hot down there when we did it. Nobody wants to put a beret on their head in Texas heat, right? Especially when you're in the outdoors for the kickoff campaign. But then we just sort of never looked back. And you know, the Red Berets are a group of craftivists, is how we term ourselves. And the whole idea around the Red Berets is a symbol for Medicare for All. That's how Laura started out. She saw the Women's March with all the pink hats on everyone's heads, and she thought to herself, what if we could get red hats on everybody's head? Red because it was the color of national nurses. Someday we would see a march with all these red hats, and everybody would know that this is our healthcare fight, right?
Yes.
Red Berets, Medicare for All. So we call ourselves the Red Thread because it's the red thread that binds us together.
Yeah, that's a great name. That binds you together for solidarity.
For solidarity, yes. And it all started with the nurses.
Solidarity theme.
It all started with the nurses getting behind Bernie Sanders and really coming out full-throated saying we need Medicare for all. Because Laura, and I don't know if you know this or not, but she studied cranial sacral massage in Britain.
Yes, I picked that up out of some of the tweets.
Right.
I paid very close attention to the tweets, and I caught that.
And, she talks about how difficult it was when people asked her, how can you tolerate the fact that people don't have health care or have it and can't afford to use it? How that just seems so barbaric. Those were the comments that she got while she was over there, and that was before the ACA, right? It's only gotten worse since then.
Yes.
And
but just a thought here, okay, at this point. I was involved in the fight for Medicare for All in 2009, okay, in 2010. I was blogging furiously back then, specifically on that issue.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew at that time that the ACA was just going to be a clusterfuck. We just knew it. It was obvious. It had all the earmarks on it. It was a bailout of the insurance companies, okay, and the pharmaceutical companies. Mm-hmm. And we could just see it happening from the start. The way Pelosi was acting, the setup in the Senate by Baucus, and Obama's refusal to pressure Reid to get rid of the filibuster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course, we knew the filibuster was going to stand against it. As long as they had the filibuster, it simply wasn't going to pass. So, of course, it was immediately tabled. And John Conyers was disrespected and had to force his way into the conference on healthcare. Practically force his way in. He brought some people from the Physicians for a National Health Program. Mm-hmm. They came with him. Facts, figures, all kinds of research on fatalities and other side effects of not having a Medicare for All system. He got nowhere. They simply didn't listen, basically tabled the whole thing. It was really a disaster from the start. So we were fighting hard, but with blogs from January 2009 all the way through the passage of the Affordable Care Act in March of 2010. And we could see the Democrats just screwing themselves, absolutely screwing themselves, ruining their chances for success in 2010. Mm-hmm. It was no surprise to us they got swamped, in 2010, because after all, what did they have to run on? All they had was the Recovery Act, which was inadequate. But it gave birth to the longest period, of a recovery from a recession that we had ever had since the Second World War. And, of course, that was because he spent less than half of what he should have spent on that act. And we knew it at the time. It was apparent, okay, to everybody at the time. Okay, so
just on that point, Joe, I went to sleep thinking we were getting a public option with that healthcare ACA legislation, because they passed it late, wee hours of the morning. So I went to sleep thinking, okay, tomorrow morning I'm going to take a look at this public option and see what's in here, because remember, now I'm running healthcare, right?
yeah.
And I read the first 3 pages of that executive summary, and I was sick to my stomach. I couldn't believe it.
And no public option. When she came in the first time, she introduced the public option in the House. Nancy Pelosi, I'm talking about. She manipulated it through the committees so that it was only going to cover, even coming out of the committee, it was only going to cover 10 million people. The original work on the public option called for a program that was going to cover 160 million people. Now, it probably still would have been a failure, even at 160 million people, because they structured it in such a way that it wasn't going to be able to compete against the private sector.
No, because they would have thrown all the sickest of the people onto the public option, which would have killed that thing, right?
And
so
they because a lot of marketing expenses onto the public option also.
No, I didn't even. See, that is something I wasn't even that far in the weeds at that point.
Oh yeah, well that was certainly true of the small program that was going to cover only 10 million people. It wasn't going to have much of a cost advantage over the private sector places, okay, at all. And it was going to have to market the hell out of the public option, and the megaphone, okay, was not there. Okay, so it wasn't surprising that as the Republicans tried to attack that program, okay, and as the establishment Democrats also tried to attack it, that it was going to be cut away. And then that's what happened over the summer. You had all these demonstrations that were coming out of the right wing, and the town hall meetings, and the Congress people were getting killed in the town hall meetings. They couldn't really defend the bill that was out there because it was so weak. And so the town hall meetings had a lot of anger, and they all got scared because the bills that were on the table didn't excite people.
Right. Well, yeah, they weren't exciting. They weren't at
all exciting. Okay, and the Democrats were talking it up and trying to present it as the greatest thing since sliced bread. And it was just, we were at one of the town hall meetings here, okay, in Reston, okay, and Howard Dean was there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and our congressman, but Jimmy Moran at that time, okay, was there. Okay, and Moran was just getting killed, and Howard Dean was getting embarrassed by all the questions.
They should have been embarrassed. They weren't prepared. They did not. You know what? I gotta ask you, Joe. How well do you think most representatives understand healthcare from a practical application?
I don't think they understand it at all.
Yeah, I don't either.
Not on top of the numbers. They don't care about the statistics. They have no idea what the federal government is spending on it now. In other words, the federal government spends right now $2.6 to $2.7 trillion a year on healthcare. It's already paying more than 2/3 of the total expenditures of the United States, okay, on healthcare. For that expenditure of 2/3, we could have a Medicare for All program.
And you know what? This is what the problem is right now. And back then, before Citizens United, right?
Yes.
Before lobbying turned our representatives into corporate agents, in my opinion.
Well, they were corporate agents even before that, but it
Yeah,
got
but now it's kind of the contract.
they have to see
Honest with
you. Yeah, yeah. Now it's just very, very obvious.
It's blatant, right?
Yeah.
But I don't. It has been my experience that if you have not been in healthcare from the standpoint of understanding how you have to administer it, understanding Medicare, understanding doctors' credentialing, understanding how you have to be compliant with, you know, what it is that like say a Medicare benefit for hospice looks like. Okay, it's very stringent. Okay, and you've got now, at that time, it was not required yet that you had electronic medical records, right? So doctors were still doctors. Doctors were still dictating what they felt their patients' needs were and what the plan of care was, right? If you're on the outside of that and you've never worked in healthcare with even a literal tertiary understanding of how that functions, hospitals, all of that, and then behind the scenes, how to bill for it, okay? And you have to remember now, it's all very, very regulated. Doctors,
I know it is.
scripts, ARNPs can write scripts under the supervision of doctors, right? But the legality, the formality, and the regulation around all of that, while you're trying to treat patients, dispense drugs, right? If you're sitting on Capitol Hill and you were elected as the legislator to take care of your commerce in your state, because those are the people that gave you enough money to send you there, you don't understand healthcare. You don't.
No.
So, you know, it does not surprise me what happened, but I can also say to you that they ruined healthcare.
Oh, yes.
Because it used to be a preventative initiative to go to the doctor. They were all about preventative care, keeping yourself healthy, finding what ailments were developing within you based on your history, based on whatever symptoms you had, however that would work, right? And they covered your preventative care from stem to stern. And, you know, it just worked better back then. Now what we have is triage based on people who are already sick. The only people who can afford to really go in and utilize even just going and getting a screen, because that stuff's not covered unless there's something that dictates that maybe you would need it in your insurance medical program.
Yes.
Right? If your doctor wants you to, you know, run up a panel because they found something and hey, you know what, I don't like the way this looks, let's go do this. You could end up with $650 worth of lab work, right? And we all know that most people don't have $650 worth of lab work to satisfy their doctor who's like scratching their head going, I don't like the way this looks, let's go do this, right?
Right.
That doesn't happen anymore.
That's one reason why they don't go to the doctor now.
Exactly.
They know if they go to the doctor, they're going to be saddled with a big bill, which they cannot afford.
Mm-hmm.
And that wouldn't happen under a Medicare for All program. Okay, but we sort of transitioned, okay, from your background into the politics, okay, of Medicare for All. And that's good. We've talked some very good things, okay, about the politics, okay, of Medicare for All. But what I'd like to do now is to get back to MMT, or to MMT, because we never actually said anything about that, and do that for a while. And then we'll get back to the politics again after you've done that for about a half hour, okay?
So my experience, my first baptism into MMT was seeing people tweet MMT, learn MMT, right?
Yeah, real progressives were doing that, right?
Yes. And it was interesting to me because, you know, being a finance individual and understanding, you know, how things are funded, what gets paid, what doesn't get paid, all of that, right? But I had never truly understood that federal taxation was the destruction of money that the federal government puts into the economy and taxes back out. right?
There's so few people who understand that
Mm-hmm.
because it's so counterintuitive, and also because the states don't operate that way, the cities and towns don't operate that way. So,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. But being, debit and credit and how do you fund things as a finance director, starting to hear that, I was like, oh, okay, what is this? Right. And I dug a little deeper and I started paying attention and following and listening to some podcasts. And, I did a little bit of my own digging because, I understand that stuff. And I would hear some of the talking points and I would think to myself, but there's a heck of a lot more going on that isn't being said here, right? But I understood that obviously you've got to start somewhere with the general public and trying to get that information out, right? Because if you're going to come at me with MMT as a finance director and a former banker and an auditor and all of that, right? And I'm scratching my head going, what are you talking about, right? Imagine someone who doesn't have that kind of background. Now, some of the talking points that I was getting, like I said, I had more questions about it than I had answers. Okay. So I did a little bit of research, which caused me to give myself a crash course again in, so I'm going to get a little weird here, but I'm going to go into the funding and I'm going to go into, I wanted to look up supply and demand and what overheats an economy and what the levers were that the Fed could utilize to bring down inflation, much to my chagrin, finding out that basically we only ever do nothing more really than, at least traditionally, than raising interest rates, which in turn then restricts capital and forces layoffs. And it really started to make sense to me now, this elusive thing, which was, how do you fund federal programs? And it made a heck of a lot of sense to me that everything that we were doing for, in federal government, I obviously knew that we were not on a gold standard anymore. That I knew inherently. But when Stephanie Kelton's book came out, and it was called The Deficit Myth. I'd been following Stephanie for a long enough time, and we really grabbed a hold of her account and the Red Berets do this all the time, grabbed a hold of Warren Gunnell's account and grew his following by retweeting the heck out of him and just making a big stink about how, this is the man with all the receipts, chief of receipts, and
all the receipts, the man with the receipts.
And we did that with Nina Turner. Some of the other surrogates on the campaign were really big on Dr. Dooley, started putting her out there. Brianna Joy Gray, excuse me. That's, we go to the people that we know understand the policy that made Bernie Sanders our candidate. Okay. Because
right. That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. So, we grabbed a hold of Stephanie and tried to do that same boost for her. Unfortunately, because she wasn't a campaign spokesman, it was a little tougher. When you start seeing people on a campaign and seeing people talk about Bernie on a regular, David Sirota and everybody that was on that second campaign, people want to know about them because they know they're going to be talking about the candidate that is Medicare for all and all the economic policies that everybody so desperately needs. It was easy to help them grow their accounts.
Right.
So I had understood the fact that the whole reason why we end up with people saying, well, how are you going to pay for that? How are you going to pay for that? I'm like, where is this, how are you going to pay for that coming from? And then I realized, oh, okay. You got a budget that's written for Congress and it's got a 2-year life to it, right? It lasts the whole session. Right? And it's enacted at the beginning of a congressional session. So basically, you're locked into this damn budget. And if your fabulous ideas, bills that you want to write, weren't covered in the budget,
then nothing happens to them.
Then you can't get it passed. And oh, by the way, you're not going to be able to get a new budget until the next session of Congress. And people who are in the know understand that you're in Congress for a year, and then you pretty much have to start your second run. And I've heard that they tell you that at least 4 hours a day you've got to spend on the phone asking your donors for money. And you wonder why these Congress people were so open to Citizens United and unlimited dollars allowed into PACs and, campaign funding and all that kind of thing. If you're sent to Congress to do a job, but you've got to spend half of the time that you're an elected official running a campaign again, if you're in the Congress itself, in the House, this is our house, the people's house, our representation, right?
Yes, and it was bought by the donors.
Not only that, but it got so expensive and difficult to raise money to run a campaign. Guys, we're beat before we even start.
Right. And so the necessity for campaign finance laws, that ends up with that. But of course, that doesn't work because the campaign finance laws get torn down by the Supreme Court. So what is there to do? And this has nothing to do with MMT, but there is a way to get around the Supreme Court other than passing a constitutional amendment. That is, Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution. I think I told you about that, already, that they could be dealt out of the game. But I don't want to go deeply into that now.
No, but back to MMT.
You were supposed to ask me questions.
Yes. Okay, so back to MMT, right?
Right.
If you were someone who is familiar enough, pretend I'm someone that's familiar enough with the idea that the deficit doesn't necessarily have to be looked at as this horrible, horrible thing, right? Explain to me why the deficit, or what the deficit actually represents on the other side of the books, okay? The federal government's supposedly in debt that amount of money, but where is that really? Where's the asset?
Okay, hang on a second. Let's distinguish, first of all, the deficit from the debt.
Okay.
Okay, what the deficit is in some finite period of time, say per year, it's the difference between spending by the federal government and the tax dollars that are settled by the federal government.
And they're supposed to net to zero, right? That's what
they are not necessarily supposed to net to zero if you believe in a balanced budget. Supposed to zero. Okay, right. If you don't like a balanced budget, but you want the federal government to have a surplus, then you're going to want to have actually a greater amount of taxing than you have spending. But if you want the private sector, or I should say the non-government sector, to save money, and the non-government sector includes both the foreign sector and the private sector, and the non-profit governments, the non-profit sector, as well. If you want that sector as a macro entity to save, then you have to have a government deficit, because the government has to be leaving money within the non-government sector, or the non-government sector isn't able to save. So that's the key thing, with MMT. The government's deficit is somebody else's surplus. So then the question arises, who's getting the surplus? Who's getting the surplus? So we live in a hierarchical society. So most of the surplus in the non-government sector either gets to foreign nations because we have a trade deficit, either that, or it goes up to the powerful sectors of the economy. It's extracted from the people okay, and it goes up to the oligarchy, okay, in some way. So, in rough terms, that's who's getting the surplus. Now, that's not something necessary. If we could control the political system, then we'd be able to direct the non-government sector surplus to those parts of the non-government that we felt should be getting that particular surplus. But we don't have the political power to do that yet.
Okay. So.
Okay, the upcoming bill, the 2.5, I'm sorry, the 3.5 trillion dollar bill,
Mm-hmm.
is the first bill in a very long time which is going to direct whatever surplus comes out of it
Mm-hmm.
To people who really need to have that particular surplus. There's some trick, though, Biden is playing, okay, with respect to that. And that is, all of a sudden, he's insisting on paying for things again. Now, in the American Rescue Plan, he wasn't insisting on paying for all of it, on offsetting all of it, okay, with taxes. Okay, the CARES Act, they weren't interested in offsetting all of it, okay, with taxes. They were running large deficits, and it was intentional. By the way, that they ran those large deficits was very good for the economy. But Biden swears that the $3.5 trillion bill is going to be deficit neutral. It's going to tax, okay, as much as it spends. So that can still be distributed in such a way that the money that is spent is actually sent to the right people. But if Biden is right, and that's how it works out, there won't be any private sector surplus that's going to enrich the private sector as a whole, all the elements of the private sector, because he made that choice. Okay, if I were him, what I would probably have done was the deficit spent the whole thing. Had really very little tax offset.
Wait a minute. Who does he want to tax back from?
Well, that's a good part. He's saying he's not going to raise taxes on people who earn less than
$450,000 a year annually. Household, right? Household.
Right, households, right. So he says he's not going to do that. He's going to try to get the tax money from corporations and from people, okay, who are whose income, okay, is higher than that when it comes to people. And for corporations, he was trying to raise the tax rates for corporations up to 28%.
Right.
As soon as he said that, he got opposition in Congress from Joe Manchin, okay, and company.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think he's, I'm not sure where he is on that. He may be at 25%, may end up at 23% or something like that. He's probably going to get a few more dollars out of them than Trump did, I think.
Trump didn't get anything out of them. He gave them money to go buy their own stock back and falsely inflate their stock prices.
Yes, exactly. He left the tax rates at something like 20.5%.
Yeah, but you're forgetting about all the tax loopholes and all the losses carried forward and everything, and they end up paying nothing.
Right. I am not really forgetting that, but all I'm saying is that by raising the tax rates, he's trying to get some more money from the corporations than they have been getting.
So, I mean, here's my thing, though, Joe, with that. Everybody understands that for the last 4 years, they've been sitting pretty, right? I mean, the corporations have made money hand over fist.
Yeah, but they were sitting pretty before, under Obama, too. The tax rates were higher under Obama, but of course, there were all these loopholes. Okay, as you said. So the corporations were making plenty under Obama too, but also the deficits under Obama were much, much smaller than under Trump.
Mm-hmm.
In the first couple of years, they were higher, okay, because of the Recovery Act.
Right.
As soon as he passed, okay, the Recovery Act, what Obama tried to do was to cut back on spending in each succeeding year. By the time he got to the end of his period, he was right on the margin. We had trade deficits, current account deficits of roughly less than 3% a year.
Now explain the trade deficit. We were exporting less than we were importing, or the other way around?
We were importing more than we were exporting.
Okay.
This involved a transfer, okay, of dollars to the bank accounts of the foreign countries.
Sure.
That primarily sit at the Federal Reserve. They don't go anywhere. The $1 trillion surplus that China has, or the $1.5 trillion surplus, I'm not sure, exactly what it is right now. It sits in Chinese accounts at the Federal Reserve Bank. It doesn't actually go anywhere. It's not over in China, okay, or anything like that. And in fact, what the Chinese mostly do is to convert, okay, the reserves to Treasury securities. Mm-hmm. So they can earn some interest on the reserves.
Well, yeah, that's it.
So for them, it constitutes a safe haven.
Right, right.
Okay? And, they convert it back to dollars by selling it into the open market, okay, when they want to do that. And they want to do that, okay, at various times because they're interested in other investments. So there's kind of an investment shift, okay, a portfolio shift. Okay, but a basic point, okay, of MMT is that there's something called the sectoral balances. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I talked about the private sector or the non-government sector.
Right.
And I talked of the government sector.
Right.
Okay, and within the non-government sector, there's also a foreign sector.
Okay.
And there's a domestic sector composed of the nonprofit firms, okay, and the profit firms, and families, households, so on. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
The basic principle is that since finite dollar transactions are going on, say within a single year,
Mm-hmm.
those transactions, when you look at the different sectors, they have to net, okay, to zero. That's
Mm-hmm.
just an accounting identity.
Right.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, if the federal government, okay, is running a deficit, and say the deficit is 6%, okay, of GDP, then within the non-government sector, that 6% of GDP has to be split up in some way. Now, if say 2%, okay, of GDP is going to the foreign sector,
Mm-hmm.
that means 4% of GDP is going to the domestic sector. Okay. So the domestic sector is getting richer. Now the question would be, who in the domestic sector, okay, is getting richer? Is it households?
No.
Is it corporations? If it's corporations, is it the large corporations? Is it the small businesses? Okay, it can be distributed, okay, in various ways. Now, if you look at the sectoral financial balances going back in time,
Mm-hmm.
for years and years and years, like during the 1970s, okay, and 1980s, you saw a situation which was not favorable to the corporations. They were actually losing savings over that particular period of time. and households were doing fairly well. During the 1980s, this began to flip around.
Yes, it
By
did.
the time you get to the 90s, the households are starting to lose money. Households are running large debts, larger and larger debts, okay, are increasing. This is not so apparent to households. It's not so apparent, okay, to households because people are using the paper value of their houses to get cash from banks. Okay, and people are feeling prosperous because they're buying cars and refrigerators and all kinds of things with the equity they supposedly have built up in
In your home.
their houses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but also they're running big debts and they're
Right.
accumulating, okay, the big debts. So when you had the mortgage crashes of 2007, okay, and 2008, whoa, the people are underwater. They're underwater all over. Okay. And you could have predicted that actually from a study of the financial balances because you could see the private debt was increasing over those years. You could see the corporate savings were increasing over those years. Okay. When Bill Clinton but took the economy into surplus, okay, that was a disaster. That
Yes,
meant
it was.
government, okay, the government was pulling money out of the non-government sector.
Hi.
And yet, and yet, we were still running large trade deficits during that time because people wanted goods, okay, from overseas, and they were cashing in their equity basically to buy those goods. That was a big factor of what was going on, okay, in those years.
Okay, so let me
You
let me
had,
say let me just slow you down real quick because I want to symbolize everything that you just said in that bit about.
go ahead.
Okay, so the government runs a surplus, which means they've taken money away from the private us, the people.
Taking net financial assets out
Right,
of
right.
the non-government sector.
And what happened was the people said, "Well, hell, there's no damn liquidity down here. I've got it sitting in my house. I'm going to go take it out of my house," right?
And that's what people did.
And that's what people did. But I don't want to blame this on the people all together.
I'm not blaming it on the people at all.
No, I know you're not. I know you're
I'm not blaming it on the people at all. What I'm doing, Kay, is blaming it on the government because the government was taking liquidity out of the non-government sector over that time. And they were saying, yay, we're running surpluses. We're getting richer. We're going to have savings. The CBO was saying, we're going to have savings as far as the eye can see. And those, of course, were supposed to be savings of the government. But government never really saves in any real sense because when government taxes more than it spends, those taxes are destroyed by the Federal Reserve in the process of settlement. The money goes home to the federal government to die.
Right.
That is what happens.
So let me give you the banking side of this, right?
Yes.
And I don't think that this is like on accident, Joe. Okay? Because I've seen too much. But if you run a government surplus, you don't have the liquidity in the hands of the people. They are looking, where am I going to get money from? And there was a lot of keeping up with the Joneses back then from
it
the
sure was, right? Especially in buying houses.
Exactly. And, you know, everybody had their pearls on and everybody was carrying their designer bags. And that was just kind of the culture, right?
Yeah, that was a good time for Bonnie to sell her jewelry.
Bonnie. Okay, so let me just tell you what the banks turned around because people had an appetite for being able to spend money. Everybody seemed to be able to spend money. What's their secret, right? Don't think for a second that the product development of the banks wasn't onto that, right?
Oh,
loans, home equity loans, let's do some creative financing and refinance your house. Let's put an arm on your house. Oh, well, you're going to make more money in 5 years than you're making right now. We know this, right?
Right, because the value of the houses is going to increase. Because
absolutely, right?
The houses are just going to go up, 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 and up, and there's never going to be a crash.
Exactly, right? So they come up with all of these products, and loan officers are pretty good at what they do, man. And back then, they were explaining to everyone what a great idea. You go to talk to somebody about doing a home equity because everybody was doing it, right? And you go talk to somebody in the bank and they'd be like, oh yeah, we'll do this loan, we'll put an arm on your house, and in 5 years it's going to go to market, it'll be marked to lending market value or market interest rates. But for right now, your house payment is going to be $700, right? And people are like, wow, my mortgage is only going to be $700 a month now. Imagine what I can do out here, right? I'll have money to buy a bigger car. We'll put a pool in. We'll do this. We'll do that, right?
Absolutely. That's what was happening.
And on top of that now, first-time home buyers were going to the banks, and those lenders would sell them. Instead of selling them a traditional 30-year that was going to put them in something that they could afford, they'd be like, oh, well, you qualify for this much of a house, and housing rates were going up at that. Housing prices were going up then. You qualify for this much of a house, but we've got this product over here. It's called an ARM. And if you can afford a mortgage of $900 a month, if I put you in this structured mortgage, instead of buying a $250,000 house, we can get you into $325,000 house because
we sure can.
We're only going to have to pay $900 a month, right? And yeah, in 5 years, this is going to get, it's going to get marked to current interest rates. But they would go so far as to say, but interest rates are stagnant, and you're not going to have to worry about that. And misrepresenting, right?
Yes.
So a vast majority of people went, like everybody in America did for our entire lives, generations back, went to the bank, asked for a loan, prayed to God they were going to qualify, and found out, wow, not only do I qualify, but
I can get a bigger house. Right? I can get a bigger house.
And then when this crash happened, I listened to the federal government blame the American people. And you know what? Among 100 other thousand things, but I think that was like the re-radicalization of Lisa. Kid you not.
Well, that was good. That was good. I'm certain it was great that you were re-radicalized, because we all need to be re-radicalized. Okay, at this point.
But back to MMT and how that started. The government was taxing back more on an annual basis than what they were putting out there in circulation, right? That's
right. From 1996, 1997, 1998, 1999, 2000. Mm-hmm. 5 straight years, they were taking net financial assets out of the non-government sector. And it was also a time when we were pulling in much more, in imports than we were exporting. So let's say that we were having a surplus of, let's say, 2%, of GDP, for one of those years. Mm-hmm. If you look at those sectoral financial balances, mm-hmm. you will find that the trade deficit, the current account deficit, actually, those two terms are not exactly the same thing, but they're very close. That might be running 5% of GDP per year or 6%, of GDP per year. Okay?
Yes.
So that means that 8% altogether was getting pulled out of the domestic private economy. 8% of GDP. If the GDP at the time was, let's say, $9 trillion a year, 8% of $9 trillion was getting pulled out of the domestic economy. That's big losses. That's big losses.
So let me ask you a question.
Incidentally, here's something interesting for you as well. we know from those years that if the American people have their druthers,
Mm-hmm.
they would like to have a trade deficit. They would like to run a trade deficit of 6% a year, get all those nice goods from the foreign countries. But they would also like to have, and we know this from other years in looking at the financial balances, the sectoral balances. Okay, if say you look at 2010, okay, in 2011, you also know that people have an appetite, if they can possibly do it, to save 6% of GDP or 7%, okay, of GDP. Okay, in other words, they want to pull that out of the economy to put it in the banks and have it sit there.
Okay.
They want to send money from this private economy into the foreign sector of roughly 6% per year. How could that possibly happen? It can happen if the federal government is willing to run deficits of 13%. But here's Obama. He's driving the deficits down after the first year in his administration. He's driving the deficits down lower and lower, first to 5%, then 4%, then 3%. He finally ends up at under 3%. And people want to have 6% sent to the foreign sector, and they want to save another 7%, and that money isn't there because he's running at only 3%, okay, in deficit spending, and he's shouting how fiscally responsible that is, when it doesn't really matter, because it does not matter from the standpoint of fiscal sustainability whether we run deficits of 13%, okay, of GDP. It may matter from an inflationary standpoint, but for the time being, our inflationary worries are very small. So the point is, he could have run deficits of 13%, okay, of GDP, and he could have made everybody very, very prosperous. And instead, he was running the other way.
Do you really think, though, that this was, how much of that was his decision? I mean, let's get real here, Joe.
At the beginning, it was all his decision.
Really?
The country was panicked. We were losing 700,000 jobs per month. If Obama had wanted to play the new version, okay, of FDR, he could have. He could have controlled everything. He decided that he was going to stand between Wall Street interests and the pitchforks. What he should have done was to have mobilized the pitchforks and gotten Wall Street under control. And he could have done that. What did he do with Obama for America, that magnificent movement he started?
What they always do to a populist movement.
He deactivated them. As soon as he got into office, he didn't want to see or hear from them anymore. I remember that. I was quite aware of what he was doing at that time and seeing it all slip away. But you can learn a lot from studying these sectoral financial balances, which is one thing which the MMTers do. They study that very, very carefully, because when they see that the deficits are getting too small and the trade deficits, okay, are exceeding the spending deficits of the government, then we know the economy is going to run into trouble, okay, that we're going to have some problems with it. Now, one thing Trump did is he ran very large deficits.
Yeah, but we, the people down here, didn't get any of that.
Well, actually, there was some of it. Okay, it wasn't much. The kinds of deficits that he was running, probably 30 cents on the dollar or 35 cents on the dollar, was going into the regular economy of day-to-day transactions among people. But if he was running, let's say, 1.3 trillion per year, that means 400 billion was going into the everyday economy. And that's some stimulus. That was not going into the everyday economy under Obama. That's why the unemployment rates were going down. Everybody was amazed. The unemployment rates were lower than they were in the Obama administration. I was not amazed because I knew he was running these very huge deficits. Of course, wealthy people and corporations were accumulating lots and lots of the dollars. But as I said, the multiplier effect, the primary multiplier effect, was roughly 30 cents on those dollars that were going into the tax cuts. So that was going into the regular economy. If you're running 1.3 trillion, as I said, that's roughly 400 billion, 425 billion that's going into the private sector. So unemployment is going lower, actually. And we saw that.
Well, yeah, we saw unemployment going lower.
Yeah, going lower. Employment was getting a little tighter. Of course, the jobs created were very poor jobs.
Exactly, Joe.
And people were still suffering. Yeah, they were shit jobs, but at least the unemployment wasn't as at 6 or 7%, which is what was going to happen if we kept on following the Obama policies, because he was bringing that deficit closer and closer to zero. That guy wanted to have zero deficits if he possibly could get it. He was entranced by the Clinton example. He wanted to end up actually balancing the budget and taking dollars out of the private sector. And the economy was even more hierarchical then than it was in 2000. So all of the money that was going to the private sector, well, okay, it was actually negative. But the point is that within the private sector itself, that would have involved more and more transfers of dollars up to the upper reaches of the private sector. That was going to happen under Obama. It would have happened under Hillary Clinton if she had gotten in, as president. It would have been a disaster. Now, Trump was a disaster in many other ways. I mean, he's a fascist. He was bringing the country closer and closer to fascism. I'm extremely happy he's out, because at least we don't have a naked form of fascism, under Biden. It's more subtle, It's inverted totalitarianism.
Yeah, and people are kinder to one another, and I'm hoping that as the years go by, it will continue to become like, my neighbors who had a Republican, sign in their front yard are no longer my bitter enemies, kind of thing, right? Because that was the crazy.
We hope that happens, but the first step in that is really this $3.5 trillion bill, that's on the fire right now.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of bastard is against that? What kind of bastard is this guy, Josh Gottheimer? What kind of bastard is Joe Manchin?
Joe, I want to be ladylike here. Don't get me fired up in that realm.
You can be ladylike.
No, I can't.
I'm not a lady.
Don't get me started. Listen, let me tell you something. I mean, let's just be honest. Let's just forget about like the personalities, and let's talk about MMT from the standpoint, because I think that this is where it gets murky. You can say that you're putting money into the private sector, but what I have not seen, and I want an MMT lever to pull that helps us ensure that small businesses can borrow money at 2%, not 11%. Because right now, what I see is no regional Fed window for the regional banks to go and get money so that they can loan them out, so that there are people who can start a small business. Let me tell you the other side of that. As long as healthcare is as bad as it is, as long as you have to go work an $18 an hour job with a master's degree in library science, my best friend's in this boat. She's got a master's degree in library science and something else, and she's like brilliant. For the last 6 years, she can't find a job now, granted, we're talking about where I live, okay? Because we've got kids and she is where she is. But she can't find a job with anyone willing to value her enough to pay her more than, $20 an hour. Okay? She wanted to start a business with me. We went and looked at a storefront, which was amazing. We had a great business plan that we had put together. We both really wanted to do it. And, I'm thinking, well, okay, so we've got to at least have a year's worth of operating expenses, maybe more, in reserve so that we don't go belly up with this. And she said, well, let me go to the bank because, she was more thinking, maybe we go get a small business loan or a personal loan to back us and we don't have to worry about holding that in reserve for our savings, long story short, 11.5%. We both have great credit. We have assets, right?
Okay. From the MMT point of view, there is no reason in the world why the interest rates should be higher for small businesses than they are for large businesses.
Right.
Large businesses have been getting loans at less than 1% interest.
Zero.
For a long time now. Yes.
Zero.
But for a long time. But why is that? Because the interest rates are controlled by the Federal Reserve.
Right.
And they're pegged to the overnight rate, except for mortgage rates, which are pegged to LIBOR.
Right.
So, so that's the situation where it's the policy of the government that is helping the banks to set the interest rates that high. The Federal Reserve could regulate that out of existence, okay, if it wanted to, and could make the banks give interest rates to small business, not at 2%, but at close to the same rate, okay, as the private sector. So let's take the CARES Act, okay, as an example.
Yeah, let's talk about that CARES Act. I love this story.
Let's talk about the CARES Act, okay. Let's talk about the $455 billion that was set aside as a loan program for the large businesses, okay. That $455 billion was sent over to the Federal Reserve so they could create a money cannon to back up the big businesses of roughly $4.6 trillion, leverage of 10 to 1.
Right, because that's the capital base that you have to hold in a lending institution. You've got to have at least 10% to meet your stress test, and then you can lend it out 10 times over.
Right, but you don't really have to have that.
But that's an easy explanation of a metric, right?
Yes, right. Okay, it's an easy explanation, but if it's important for people to understand that, okay, is arbitrary. It could be at 3%, it could be at 2%. And with the Federal Reserve actually backing up the private commercial banks, it could be at 0%. In Canada, it is at 0%. So this 10% is just something coming out of textbooks years and years ago, and we didn't have a fiat currency system.
Correct.
And the banks actually operated on 10%. Now, they don't have to operate, okay, on 10%. But actually, Steve Mnuchin, okay, and Jay Powell decided, okay, we'll use the 10 to 1 leverage thing because everybody understands that.
Right.
So they used it. They had the $455 billion. They sent it over to the Fed. They leveraged it, okay, by 10 times. Okay, and know what happened? What happened is that it was hardly used at all. Why was it hardly used at all? Because it was there. With the $4.6 trillion backing up the large businesses, The large businesses could sell stock on the open market whenever they wanted. They could buy back their own stock and raise the value of their own stock on the open market.
Wow, look at the boom in the stock market.
They could create whatever financial manipulations they wanted to, because everybody knew they couldn't go broke because there was $4.6 trillion backing them. That was never even used. That was the astounding thing. The money cannon was never even used. Small businesses didn't get that under the CARES Act. Yeah, small businesses got a few $100 billion, okay, that was made available to them. But there was no fund at the Federal Reserve.
Right.
There was nothing like that. There were no shenanigans like that to make small businesses secure.
But that was the original intent, right?
I don't think that was ever the original intent. I think so many of the people in Congress are about just taking care of the large businesses. They talk a good game about
That's obvious.
Like small business, but yeah, that's what's been going on for decades and decades and decades.
Mm-hmm.
They've been screwing small business people
and everybody else, right? I mean, we've got shitty jobs that don't pay anything, lousy healthcare. It shouldn't even be called healthcare. Okay, we've got terrible health infrastructure. We've got no public health system because our health structure is such a disaster, integrated through underwriting of insurance entities who, let's all remember now, can't make money if you need to use your health care, right? So they're going to deny you to make even more profits. Now, when COVID starts spiking again, I don't think everybody realizes they're not doing other surgeries. There are some places the hospitals are so overwhelmed, you can die because you can't get in. Okay?
They're putting off surgery that people need.
Yes, instead
because of the flood of COVID patients.
Exactly.
So people are having to wait for months and months, and months.
Right.
Guess what? In Canada, they don't have that problem.
Well, okay, so my point, though, Joe, is we come back to this place where MMT, first of all, I don't like calling it a theory, but the government spends money on programs. They spend into fruition whatever it is that they decide to do. It's quite evident to me that they don't want to bolster small business. They don't want to see higher paying jobs.
Okay. So who's they? Okay. It's the people.
The policymakers.
The policymakers. The people who are in power.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Present and who are fed by the donors. They don't want to do things for small businesses.
Right.
And
because
for people
the big corporations
in general. Right. Because the big corporations want to retain their power over people. It's about power over people.
Exactly.
So what do we have to do? Well, what we should do en masse, I've been saying this now for years and years and years, but of course you can't really get people to do it. You have to structure a movement in such a way that people think that it's realistic to try to do this. But what we really have to do is to have wholesale changes in the Congress so that most of the Congress is replaced at once in one fell swoop, and the fear of God is left in the rest of them who remain. There almost has to be a rule. If there is an incumbent in Congress, you vote against the incumbent. You vote against that incumbent. There's a whole party of incumbents who never does anything for small business and who never does anything for people.
And we're not just talking about Democrats or Republicans. It's the whole lot of them.
Well, first I want to talk about specifically the Republican Party, because there's not a single one of them who does anything for people or who does anything for small business.
Small business, yeah.
Every one of them inside of the House of Representatives should be replaced. Mm-hmm. Now we come to the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. Okay. There has to be wholesale slaughter in that party also. Maybe not everybody,
Yeah, but we know who they are.
Few, but very few should survive. I mean, maybe more, perhaps no more than 50 of the Democrats who are there now. And of course, those 50, seeing the wholesale slaughter of all of the others, would even be taking a different attitude than themselves, because they would know what could be done to them if we took it in our heads to do that.
So can I leave us from MMT and talk about my theory on how we can get this enacted?
Of course.
Peacefully? Because I'm all about pacifists. I'm a pacifist. We're talking about doing this peacefully. He's talking about wholesale slaughter, but he doesn't mean it literally. Okay, he's talking about.
I don't mean it literally. I mean wholesale slaughter at the polls.
Exactly. Well, okay, so let's talk about this from an activism standpoint, right? When you hear people talk about, let's talk about FOF for a second, fight on all fronts, which is a hashtag. If you follow me, I'm 50 lines only out on Twitter. Laura from the Red Berets is Red Berets, M for all, Medicare for all. And there's a whole bunch of us. Vote No GMO, and we hang out with some candidates that are on their second congressional run, like Call for Congress. I'm telling you, if we could replicate Jason Call in various shapes and forms and all kinds of stuff, but everybody with the same policy initiatives and everybody with the same activism and walking the walk and doesn't even have to say he walks the walk kind of thing. That's the guy, right?
He is. He's a great guy.
And here's the thing. I know a lot of people are really, really soured on electoral politics, and I understand where they're coming from, and I understand why they're saying what they're saying. I think we can meet everybody up in the middle and still accomplish both goals. And let me give you the theory. Let me give you this theory before we get sidelined. You have to get out into your communities and organize people. And the way to do that is a little simpler than you think, because we've done it over and over and over again. You have to meet people where they are, right? You don't go out and say, hey, vote for, if all we ever do when we get out the vote is do some sort of effort 2 weeks before an election is going to be held, we're never going to get anywhere.
Right.
The best time to start organizing is right now, when nobody's really made major campaign announcements, and even if they have, nobody starts paying attention for quite some time.
Right. Okay. So if I can introduce something short here.
Yeah.
What this is about is continuous organizing.
Yes.
But from the bottom up. Why is continuous organizing something that's necessary all the time? It's necessary because there is continuous lobbying in Washington, D.C.
Yes, exactly.
Every day, every week, every month, every year. It goes on all the time. It's an industry. They got those voices in their heads all the time to compete with that. They need to have our voices in their heads all the time.
Exactly.
The only way you get that is through continuous organizing.
So organizing, I think, is one of those terms that everybody thinks they understand what that means, but really, I don't think they do. Organizing is getting into your community and addressing the needs of the people. Whether or not somebody's running on that need that you're trying to address or not, you'll be very, very surprised at how quickly you start finding out what those needs are of your community that are on their lips. And if you are at all political savvy, you start to realize, oh, okay, that fits into the, what I know about what's going on with the prison industrial complex, or what I know about what's going on with gerrymandering and degentrification of communities, right? And the schools are crap, and they shut the schools down, and the property goes to crap, and people are like, I can't afford to live here anymore, because what happens when that goes on? Income people who buy up the properties and they refurb them, and all of a sudden your neighborhood that you used to live in, now you can't afford and you're getting relocated, right?
Yes.
It's those things, those people are busting their rear ends. They're not tied in because they're trying to keep a roof over their head and food in their kids' mouths. Getting into those communities, finding your activists, getting into those communities is easier than you think. People in those types of communities, they do some very specific things like take the bus, go to Walmart on the weekends, lots of places where people are in lines for food banks. If COVID keeps spiking, your food bank distribution is going to be huge again, right? If you go and meet those people where they are and start asking them, what do you need? I need a decent job, right? My employer, I used to be a waiter. There are no more restaurants anymore because of what happened with COVID, right? And you start talking to them, oh, well, would healthcare be something that would benefit you? What if we were able to enact Medicare for all, right? And these are the people that you want to be able to reach and talk to about the things that matter to you. Like for me, it's Medicare for all. And if it's not Medicare for all, then because I can't, we know we can't, they tabled it for goodness sake, right? It's not coming anytime soon. I work with Whole Washington. I know what their legislation looks like. I know what the demographics are in the state of Washington. And in my opinion, if we could get Whole Washington to pass that legislation, that ballot initiative that they had to suspend because of COVID spiking, but it'll come back later down the road. One state, in my opinion, would prove out that healthcare would work, right? In your community, it might be that what you need is a housing, you need the federal government to count, or your local government, your state government, to disperse the funds that were given to every state that they've been sitting on for what, 3% was dispersed the 13th of August, as of the 13th of August? What was it, like 450
it was $3 billion out of $46 billion.
Right, $46 billion for people to be able to go and get access to those funds to pay their back rent.
And the $46 billion was supposed to be enough to pay all the back rent that was due in the country. So everybody would have been caught up. No need for evictions.
So people
it was perfect. They just didn't figure out how to get that money directly to the people.
I don't think they wanted to, Joe.
$3 billion dispersed.
I don't think they wanted to. But if people were on the ground, were organized, okay? If you were in touch with your communities and people talked about this, right? When that money came to the state and people were organized, you could go to the state house or to your reps or go to the governor, right? And make a big stink. Where's that money? We're sitting on that money. I don't think most people knew that money was there, Joe. They didn't build.
I am sure that is absolutely true, Lisa.
Right?
They did not know the money was there.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the infrastructure wasn't there to actually distribute that money. They could have given people, all the recipients, digital cards.
It's an application. I don't understand.
And they could have had them pick up those cards, okay, at local banks, had the cards filled with a certain amount of money, or just made them basically charge cards where they could go and charge the rent.
The back rent, yeah.
At their landlords. That's all that would have had to have been done. That's easy to set up electronically. The question is, why wasn't it set up at the time the CARES Act was passed? Something like that to get money to people. If they had done that at the time of the CARES Act, it would have been in place for the American Rescue Plan. And the $46 billion would have been distributed within the first week. But within the first week, it was easy to do.
If we would have...
At the time, there was a bill in Congress called the ABC Act,
okay,
which had within it the mechanism for setting up this kind of distribution system of funds,
Mm-hmm.
okay, to people.
Mm-hmm.
It was a bill that was introduced by Rashida Tlaib,
Yeah.
and the first co-sponsor was actually Jayapal.
Okay.
That bill was actually for giving people a basic income,
Right. Yeah.
COVID emergency of $2,000 per month.
Mm-hmm.
They were going to fund that bill with $2 trillion platinum coins. $2 trillion platinum coins. There wasn't going to be any need for taxes. Okay, and there wasn't going to be any need for borrowing. They were just going to use $2 trillion coins, create $2 trillion more in reserves at the Fed for supporting that kind of program, and then they were going to set up the distribution system before the funds, okay, at that time. That bill just sat around because the Republicans weren't having any. They certainly weren't going to pass it.
So I guess what I'm trying to say to my activists to understand policy and follow legislation that's been introduced, and I know we're weird birds, but damn it, we're out there. Organizing in your communities so that people have a place to come and you can let them know these kinds of things, that the CARES Act is providing rental assistance. Because if we imagine, Joe, if we had,
it was actually the American Rescue Plan that actually
okay,
that
but if
assistance.
people knew that that money was available in their state and that the state needed to put a distribution system in place, right? You could have put that pressure on them. The fact that people didn't know that that money was even there to be available for them until how many months later?
Right, but it shouldn't have been distributed through the states.
Well, but it was, right? I mean, unfortunately, that's how they did it. Did I lose you?
Going through the banks. And, they just didn't do it. They keep relying on the states to do things
And the
when
states
they
aren't gonna
know
do it.
very well that the states' systems for distributing funds to people are antiquated and full of red tape, yet they keep on relying on states to do that.
And I'm going to tell you, Joe, they're antiquated on purpose.
Yeah, well, they're antiquated on purpose. Right, and it's also there simply because most states have not been putting their funds into that. They haven't been putting their funds into education. They haven't been putting things into funds that people need. If people need something, they don't put funds into it.
So let's talk about why it's important for everybody to put some pressure on passing this reconciliation bill. Let's talk about
Okay, before we get into that, though, I want to make one point. That point is, I have considerable sympathy for people who are calling for direct action, okay, at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that you can do everything with a direct action movement, okay, of some kind, while you ignore the electoral politics, that doesn't work.
Well, it's going to get us more.
The reason why it doesn't work is because in the end, you have those people sitting there and they have to pass the laws.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if the wrong people are sitting there, you can stand on your head, do anything you want, okay, with respect to direct action. And
not going to mean a thing.
Not going to mean, okay, a thing. And there are a lot of us now who no longer care, okay, for AOC, okay, or her compatriots in Congress. But let me tell you right now, if everybody in Congress was like that small group, okay.
Oh, we'd be a different world.
And we had direct action going on at the same time.
Beautiful. Then it would work.
World. You have to get both of those things.
Exactly. I know.
Okay.
I realize it. I realize it. And I sympathize with them from the standpoint of, could you imagine being them up in that pit of vipers and what that's like? I can. I
Can you
can.
imagine being under control of Nancy Pelosi and her freezers and her designer ice cream?
Hey, Connor Lamb's my rep, Joe.
Connor Lamb is your rep. Yes, I know.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Trust me.
Right. Okay, so you were going to talk about getting the Reconciliation Act passed, okay, right now.
I was going to ask you because I'm noticing that very few people are paying attention to that Reconciliation Act.
I've been paying close attention.
But I'm talking about just like in general, it's not getting a lot of clicks. People are just like disgusted, okay? And it's convoluted because people, and whether it's on purpose or not, or are, hey, listen, you got to be like legislatively savvy. People don't understand the difference between the 1.2 infrastructure bill and the 3.5 reconciliation bill. So easily, quickly, let's just make a difference here. The infrastructure bill is a corporate giveaway, period, the end. Sprinkled with a little bit of regressive taxation that like is a sin, and I can't believe it's even in there. The 3.5, 3.2, 3.5 reconciliation bill are programs for Main Street in a big way, right? I mean, I know there's some other stuff in there, but there's a lot of things for the people that really need it. And would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree with it. That's the way it's been structured, okay, in this particular Congress, because it wasn't possible to put everything in the same bill. Sanders and Biden did want to start giving some things to people, and so did Nancy Pelosi as well. But if they put everything into one bill, they thought, okay, that bill was simply never going to pass. So they put together this particular kludge, okay, that there was going to be a separate bill for the bipartisan people. In other words, the centrist people who were taking all of the donor money, who were especially keen to, to do the donor bidding. And they were going to give them a bill that was going to be at least 50% of it, okay, a giveaway to rich the private sector interests. And they separated that but from the bill for the people. And since then, they've been trying to manipulate things in such a way that until the bill for the people passes the Senate,
they won't even consider the other.
They will not pass the other bill, which has already passed the Senate. They will not pass it out of the House. It's going to sit in the House until the reconciliation bill is passed. Now, so far, to her credit, it seems that Nancy Pelosi is being firm about that. There are lots of theories about why she's being firm. The most popular theory is that this time, 50 plus of the Congressional Progressive Caucus has stood up and has said, if the reconciliation bill doesn't pass first, we're going to defeat the two bills. Nothing will get passed. We won't vote for anything if the
I have a theory on why, Joe.
Huh?
I have a theory on why that is. I have a theory on why they're acting the way they are. Because they're going to get wiped out. They're going to get freaking wiped out. Okay? And
yeah, no, they're going to get wiped out. And by the way, something else which is involved there too. One of the reasons why they're going to be wiped out is because of the voter suppression, okay, and the gerrymandering. And they have to pass 3 bills to get out of that particular box. And they can't even pass the first one, which is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, but because of the filibuster and because of the people on the Democratic side who will not get rid of the filibuster. They have the power now to get rid of the filibuster.
And they refuse to.
Option, and they can get rid of the filibuster.
But see, Joe, this is why people are so damn frustrated, okay? And I implore all people who go on platforms and talk about this, okay? If you start calling these representatives out for what it is, what you see, not being snarky against one another on Twitter, right? Start talking about it with your neighbors, talking about it with the people that you work with, talking about it on these platforms. Everywhere you go, they choose to be in gridlock. You know what I hear over and over and over again? How many times have we talked about stimulus bills that were giveaways to the corporation, right? We finally have one that's going to actually help America, the people who really, really need it. And they throw another corporate giveaway in, and we want this before you're going to get that. What are you kidding me? Kill it.
We know very well that if they get the infrastructure bill, they're going to kill the reconciliation bill.
Mm-hmm. So if we get the reconciliation bill,
going through a song and dance, okay, with Nancy Pelosi for weeks,
Joe,
to try to get her to pass the infrastructure bill first,
Joe,
so they would have the leverage to kill or severely cut the reconciliation bill. Everybody knows they're doing it for that purpose. It's out in the open.
I want to turn the tables on them. Let's pass the damn reconciliation bill and kill the damn infrastructure bill. Wouldn't that be an idea?
Well, okay, I differ a little bit on that. There's about, in very rough terms,
got it.
There's a $1.2 trillion bill there. There's about half of it that is going to enrich corporations, okay, and rich people. There's another half of it that is going to actually produce things that are needed by people, like it really is for the physical.
Half of it. Then got it.
What I would say is cut out the half of it that is lemon socialism and keep the half of it that is really for the people.
All I am asking is that our Democrats go on the offense. You need to go on the offense, and we all need to start calling them out as going on the offense. We all expect the Republicans to do this. Quit acting like puppies who can't accomplish anything. It's good cop, bad cop, Joe, and we need to get in their faces and call them out. Got that damn infrastructure bill.
We certainly do, but there are specific people we have to call out. There are 8 people in the Senate that have to be called out because they are standing in the way of getting rid of the filibuster.
Did somebody make me the whip? Am I the American whip? Bullshit. Where's the whip? Come on, Joe. That is their job. We can pressure them, but you know what? The political will isn't there, and that's what we have to start telling them.
The whip is actually Dick Durbin.
I know who the whip is.
Okay.
I'm very well aware.
Okay, and he doesn't have too much of a whip. As long as they have the filibuster, he doesn't have too much of a whip.
But we can kill the filibuster, and they are choosing.
They have to kill the filibuster. Now, most probably
doesn't want to.
Okay, most probably, out of the 9 people, there are probably 7 of them that can be pressured by Joe Biden to vote in favor of getting rid of the filibuster. Okay, the 2 who will stand the strongest are Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema.
Okay, so here, if it were my job, I'd go into Mr. Manchin's office and I would say to him, we have a bill that's going to come to the floor and I've got the votes, Joe. The first year, you're going to reduce your carbon emissions by half. The second year, you're going to reduce them again by half. And then by the third year, you're going to be carbon neutral. Or you give me your vote to kill the filibuster, and we will give you something that isn't so unreasonable. That's how you play hardball, Joe.
I know how to play hardball, but the problem is they don't have the votes to do that, okay, to Manchin, because the Republican Party is solid against. They've got 50 votes. So to pass anything at all, they need Manchin, and they need Kirsten Sinema. They have to be threatened in a very, very negative way. And that's...
They're being allowed to do this.
Huh?
They're being allowed to do this.
They're being allowed to do this by Biden. He will not put the kind of pressure on them that needs to be put on them. But I will tell you now, there is a possibility that no matter how much pressure he puts on them, that he will fail and they will vote to keep the filibuster. However, there's a chance that that will not happen, and we won't know until he does it. And
are you talking about Biden?
Yeah, he's refusing to do it. He has to put the pressure on. Chuck Schumer has to put the pressure on. And the reason why this is dangerous, risky, but they still have to do it, is that Joe Manchin could walk over to the Republican side and organize with them, putting Mitch McConnell back in control of the Senate. Now, I don't think that's going to happen.
He would have to switch parties.
Okay? So I don't think that's going to happen, but that's why they're reluctant to push him to the wall. Okay, now Sinema is in a tougher situation. The reason why she's in a tougher situation is
she's smart enough to know how tough the situation is, but go ahead.
She can't shift over to the Republican Party, in Arizona, because they want to nominate a really crazy Trumpist, and she will not be able to convince them that she is that crazy a Trumpist. Now, she's been pretty friendly to Trump as it happens, but not enough for those people. So she can't be nominated for the Senate over on the Republican side. She has to run as a Democrat, and she's going to be primary. This time around, she's going to be primaried by I don't know how many people, because she is just really against the mainstream of the party. And there are lots of progressives, in Arizona now, and they're going to get her butt if she doesn't start to change her behavior. I think she can be coerced because the Republicans can't really protect her.
I hope she goes primary. I don't want to save her.
I don't want to save her either. I certainly
don't. You're talking about just on the filibuster itself.
I'm talking about actually making the vote on the filibuster, a litmus test.
Oh, okay.
Either they have to vote, to get rid of the filibuster, or they get absolutely no support from the DNC, from the DSCC, from any Democratic organization, and moreover, they have to be told that those organizations will fund their competition in primaries in 2024. That will be the revenge of the Democratic Party.
You're putting a lot of trust in them. I don't have it, Joe.
I'm not putting any trust in them. I don't trust them at all. I'm just saying what has to happen if they're going to get rid of the filibuster. If they don't get rid of the filibuster, none of the Voting Rights Acts are going to pass. There are 3 there now that are important. None of them will pass if they don't get rid of the filibuster. And they have to get rid of the filibuster actually within the next month, because if they wait for too much longer, it will be too short a time between then, and the election, and the Republicans will still have a free hand in terms of voter suppression, and gerrymandering. What they will do is, if the laws prohibit that, they will take the case up to the Supreme Court. Now, something can be done about that. They can use the exceptions clause of Article 3, Section 2 to deal out the Supreme Court. But right now, there's no sentiment in Congress to do that. I don't know if even more than half a dozen of them actually know that's a possibility.
Why do I feel like this is just one big soap opera about how we've been had? I mean, that's really, I hate to be that cynical, but that's what I keep hearing over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's what I think too. Okay. But whether or not that's the case, we have to fight.
Oh, yeah.
We have to assume that we can influence the situation, because that's what people who fight on all fronts do.
Yes, exactly.
What
Exactly.
we have to do. We have to fight, okay, on all fronts. Okay, and on that note, I want to say that tomorrow's interview with Laura Fielding, who was here,
Yay. She's the softer side of this crew.
is going to be all about fighting on all fronts and bottom up democracy in the Red Berets movement.
Yes.
The Red Berets is a movement in itself. It's a movement for Medicare for all. It's a movement for using all the tools we have to get a national Medicare for all program, to get a NEMA program actually through. But all the tools includes state level single payer. In
Yes,
those
it does.
states where we can have state level single payer.
Yes, it does.
And
Because we need
tomorrow, we're going to be talking about that.
Mhm.
Okay, what I usually like to do at this time is to go over comments. I usually read out all the comments. Okay. Today, however, I'm going to be selective because we're already at about 11 o'clock, and it's getting late. I usually finish at 10:30 or so, and then I start to read off the comments. So let's go back to the beginning, okay, and pick up the comments that seem to be most closely related to what we're talking about, or the things we've talked about here. There are some comments about some personal experience, okay, that people have had in healthcare, by losing people to cancer, having a bankruptcy problem. Yes, there are family breakups all the time. There are bankruptcies that come out of this. There's addiction that comes out of it. It intersects, okay, with OxyContin. Of course, there are foreclosures, okay, and people who are losing their homes, okay, because of the system of how we bill people, okay, and how we collect people. It's all terrible. It's just a nightmare, and we have to end it. And Medicare for All is going to end it. Fran, Sylvia's daughter, says, hello, Lisa, Dr. Firestone. Thank you for this. Hashtag solidarity. Hashtag the FOAF, which is fight on all fronts, folks.
Yeah, Fran.
Yeah, hey, Fran. And GoStart says hashtag MMT plus hashtag FJG. FJG is Federal Job Guarantee.
Yes.
Which, by the way, intersects with the Medicare for All issue, because if Medicare for All isn't passed by then, the FJG is going to offer Medicare to everybody in that particular program.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, and once everybody has that, and also good benefits to people as part of that program, as well as a living wage.
Right.
So once that, okay, is legislated, it's going to serve as a magnet, okay, for the rest of the economy. Because if other people aren't going to provide that, what's going to happen is people are going to take a federal job under the Federal Job Guarantee. If the private sector wants workers, it's going to have to conform to the minimum of the Federal Job Guarantee. Okay, so
It's a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. And we'll get to talk about that sometime in the future. In fact, I think we should make these conversations, okay, with the Red Berets movement and major people in the Red Berets movement a continuing thing.
I think so too.
Each week,
and we need to ask people what they want to talk about.
We can ask people what they're interested, in talking about, but there's an awful lot to talk about, and there's a movement to keep in touch with each week, and that movement is the Red Berets Movement.
You know what? I don't even have my red beret. That's terrible. I don't have it on. I'll have to go look and find it.
Okay, if you have it near, we'll still be here for a while longer, and you can
Read your comments. I'll be back.
Okay. Cherry Wise says stock versus flow. Deficit is a flow concept. Debt is a stock concept. Yeah, I actually didn't even get too much into the distinction between deficits and debts. We got sidetracks actually with different things, but that, is very important. But also the two things are defined, in different ways. Specifically, what the deficit is about, what I said, is the discrepancy between, and there's the red beret being modeled by Lisa. It's a great looking red beret.
We're going to get Bonnie one. Oh, no, you're getting yours.
Yeah, we're getting ours. I guess they're coming soon.
Yes, they are.
Says Laura. And Sherry says, but deficit is a flow concept, and debt is a stock concept. That's true. But in addition, the deficit is the spending minus the taxation. That's what it is. But the debt is the principal value of the Treasury securities that are out there. So conceptually, it's different from the deficit. It's normally conceived of, as an accumulating deficit, but it's not just an accumulating deficit, or simply it's not really an accumulating deficit. It's the principal value of those securities that have been sold by the Treasury. When you look at the national debt and you say it's $28 trillion, it means that there are Treasury securities out there that are $28 trillion. What are those securities? They're basically alternative paper that is issued by the federal government. They're an alternative form of money which is not considered money except by economists. Certain economists, like the MMTers, know that functionally it is a form, of money more than it is a form, of debt. Sure, it involves repayment by the federal government, but since the federal government is the currency issuer, it can always repay the debt. And by the way, a fiat currency, that's a currency that the government can issue, at will, and whose value can be defined by the government at will, but also, and most importantly, it's a currency that is non-convertible to any sort of backing. In other words, no commodity backing is involved. No gold, no silver, no platinum, nothing like that. It doesn't have that kind of backing. The only backing it has is the legitimacy of the government that actually issues the currency. If you take away the legitimacy of the government, then the currency could fall. It could fall. But as long as the government is able to maintain what we call, a monopoly of the means to coerce people, or a near monopoly, it can have the power to issue a fiat currency, which is what is done here in the United States. So that non-convertibility, that's a key feature of a fiat currency that everybody should be aware of. If you go to the federal government and you turn in your $5 bill, and you say you want to trade it in for something, they will give you a new $5 bill. That's all you're going to get. You don't get $5 in gold, or $5 in silver, or $5 in Bitcoin. You only get $5 in the currency of the United States. You trade the currency of the United States for the currency of the United States. That's all you get. It's not convertible to any other currency. Anyway, Evelina says, the dying hallucinate. reaching out to those who went before is a wonderful thing. And she says, I know I would. I wonder if I would. Anyway, going further with these comments, Ann Ambrose points out when folks say we're in debt to China, that's really disingenuous because you must first have dollars before you can buy a treasury bill. Okay, an asset swap. Yeah, it's just an asset swap. Before you can buy the treasury bill, yeah, you got to have some dollars. So the federal government, in giving them the treasury security, is really simply swapping, okay, an asset with them. And it's making a promise to swap it back with a gain in interest at some future time. Functionally, that is all that is going on there. Evelina says, your wonderful ancestors, Kay, deja vu versus 2022 coming to a town. 2008, deja vu 2022 is coming to a town. It's actually Ghost Star 2010, deja vu 2022. Yeah. It's 2010, which is analogous to 2000K and 22, unless they change the situation right now. But they're all such practical people that they can't envision doing something radical to change the situation. And they got to do something radical, like pass bills that people love, like the Medicare for All bill, and like pass those 3 voting rights bills so Republicans can't fix the system. The Republicans are visibly and publicly fixing the system at this point, and the Democrats don't have the balls to stop it. They have the votes, but they don't have the balls. Steve says probably she waits for you. I'm not sure what Steve was saying there, but anyway, I'm scrolling down. There are some other good comments. I am scrolling fast through. Lana says, according to Warren Mosler, the federal government neither has nor doesn't have any money. There is a sense in which that is true, but what the government has is the capability to produce an infinite amount of money in the private sector. Maybe I shouldn't say infinite, but an unlimited amount of money, okay, in the private sector. Whatever it chooses to produce and spend into the private sector, it can do. That doesn't mean there won't be consequences. If it produces too much and directs it in the wrong way, there can be inflation. And the MMT people constantly mention inflation, and they are right to do that. But it's more than inflation. When you're passing a bill like this reconciliation bill, you should be attempting to gauge the impact on the whole economy that is going to have. You can spend 2 bills, each being $3.5 trillion, and they can have entirely different impacts. One bill can have completely unacceptable impacts, like making the rich much richer, okay? And the other bill can be very good for a whole host of people. So it's not the $3.5 trillion that's so important. It's the impact the $3.5 trillion is going to have, and we have no governmental agency assessing that impact right now. CEO only assesses the budgetary impact. It doesn't assess the consequential impacts on the real economy. It is incapable of doing that. It doesn't have the people necessary to make those kinds of impact measurements. It's been so used to play around with the money. CBO doesn't have that. It can't tell what employment impact certain programs are going to have.
Has it always been like this?
It has always been like this. CBO was founded as an institution to deal with deficits and debts and to try to forecast those kinds of things. It was never intended to forecast what was going to go on in the real economy. And it has never done that.
But okay, so this is starting to explain a lot. So the Fed is reacting to crap policy that nobody did any analysis on as to how it was going to impact anything? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what you're hearing, and that's right. And that's right. And I don't think the Fed has the capability to forecast the kind of impact bills will have on the economy either.
Well, that's not their job. But the fact that nobody does that is mind-blowing. It explains a lot, but it's mind-blowing. It's infuriating.
The organization that was a creature of Congress that came the closest to doing that was the Office of Technology Assessment. And guess what? The Office of Technology Assessment was killed by Newt Gingrich as soon as he gained control of Congress.
Well, then maybe
he didn't want to have those assessments done. He didn't want to have those assessments done because it was inconvenient for the Republicans to have those assessments done.
Whose bill was it? I mean, how did we do it? Did the president enact it, or how did it happen? Do you remember?
Congress just stopped funding the Office of Technology Assessment. That was an internal office, of the Congress. It did not require any approval from the president. It was just like the CBO. It was set up as an agency of Congress, as basically an internal agency to advise the Congress when it came to legislation Congress was considering. And when the Republicans got in and got control of Congress, they simply decided to kill the Office of Technology Assessment because it was doing inconvenient things like trying to assess the environmental impact of certain bills. And of course, they didn't want environmental impact to be assessed. And there are a whole host of other things, that it was assessing. It was doing very, very good studies, the Office of Technology Assessments. One of the things that has to be done to try to remedy what's going on inside of the Congress is to restart the Office of Technology Assessment. I actually have proposals for an expanded Office of Technology Assessment, which is in my book on who needs balanced trade, who needs a balanced budget. But anyway, I envisioned the kind of thing that had to be done in order to fix the Congress, and that was one of the things that I thought.
And that's in your Who Needs a Balanced Trade deficit? What's the book called?
Who Needs Balanced Trade? Who needs balanced budgets?
Okay.
I'll double check to see if it's in that book. It could be in one of the others, as well. But let me just
go ahead. Keep going. Read the comments. Give everybody love.
Right. As I said, I'm not going to read them all out. But Sandy Deck says Joe is a great teacher. Thank you, Sandy. I had to read that one out, of course. Steve said, but what is the link to watch? Tomorrow night, you mean, Steve? It's just come back here. It'll be here tomorrow night. And Lana says, please tell Lisa I would love to powwow with her offline about bank practices and lending, because Lana Dell is also a banker.
Awesome.
And she's also, but she's an MMTer. She's been with RP for years and years, and guess what? She also is a supporter of the Red Berets.
Oh, yay! Okay, then we're talking.
Supporter, of the Red Berets. So she would love to powwow with you.
So at 50 lines only, Lana.
At 50 lines only, and Lana is at Organic Fanatic.
Oh, good. I know. Okay. I just saw her app.
Right. And Sherry says 1990 is also when jobs really started going overseas. But NAFTA, computerization, cheap energy, and tax loopholes made this possible. Yes. And Steve says, Steve, I'm not sure. I think Joe will share it tomorrow. So Lisa this evening, and I'm up tomorrow. That's absolutely correct. We will be here at 9 o'clock tomorrow, and Laura will be having a conversation with me on Bottom Up, organizing and fighting on all fronts, which we did some talking about also this evening, but tomorrow we're really going to get into it.
Yeah, that's her bailiwick, big time.
That's her bailiwick, big time. And from a bottom up organizing point of view, I think Laura is a great leader.
Oh, she's fabulous.
She is always boosting people.
Mm-hmm.
She never fails to thank people for what they do. She never fails to inspire people. As a natural leader, she is a great national leader. That's one of the reasons why I like and support this particular movement, because she is great at organizing people and getting them to work. And there are no negatives. There's nothing negative. She's never taking down people. She's never working against them. She's never gaslighting them. You won't find that in this particular movement, as you will in another movement that I could name, but will not.
Don't go there. Don't go there.
I'm not going to go there.
Don't go there.
I won't go there.
We're right here.
Right. We're right here where we want to be, so we're not going there. Okay, Steve Wolbrand says, just print the damn checks, that the chips fall where they may. People are dying out there. If we can afford 20 years in Afghanistan, we can afford anything. 20 years in Afghanistan will only eventually cost us $6.25 trillion. Okay, for Medicare for all, it's going to be $2.8 trillion per year. Over 10 years, maybe 28 to 32 trillion dollars, and of course it will be going up higher. Now, I'm not saying we can't afford it. We absolutely can afford it. In fact, it will be cheaper to have Medicare for all than to have anything else. I can tell you that. We'll save 1/3 to 1/2 of what we're spending now. As Randy Ray just said, he was in a conversation with Steve Grumbine on macro and cheese, okay, on by July 10th.
Mm-hmm.
And he pointed out we could save 50% if we had a national Medicare for all program. We could be like Canada. We could be like New Zealand.
Oh, we'd be better. Can you imagine if Americans didn't have to worry about their health care?
I can imagine.
We would have the America of the 1940s and 50s back. We would have families. We would have
people living a lot longer, though. Have the 1950s back, but with extended lifespans. With people living to 90 and 95, it would be great.
Well, you could get families back to communities. I mean, because of the wages and this way that things are now, people come of age and they leave, and we don't have that cross-generational interaction like we did before. We've been scattered to the wind. You've got to give the wealth back to the people.
Absolutely.
And to the people who've never had it. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
On and on and on. And once we get that system, okay, of Medicare for all, there's going to be a lot of other things to do afterwards. Now we have to be focused on that. Very, very focused on that. Fighting on all fronts, okay, for that. But there's a huge amount more to do, okay, as well. And there needs to be a bottom-up movement, okay, that is going to do it, because the top-down movements do not work.
Very true.
Okay. I'm just scrolling down, trying to find should not overlook, cannot overlook. But I scrolled down a little too fast, so I missed some things. Let me get back there. Carmen says, Joe, that's why the policymakers, namely Republicans, are sabotaging voting rights so such a slaughter won't take place. I know they feel it in the air, so they're breathing down the voters' necks. That could very well be, Carmen. That could very well be. Laura says, continuous organizing equals watering the grassroots.
There it is.
It's a very good way to put it. That's the way I think of it too. It's watering the grassroots. Laura says, tell these people who are dividing healthcare justice organizers into state versus national, which is a false construct, need to sit down. It's a failed strategy and a failed methodology too.
Over and over and over and over. But we can do it a couple more times and get nowhere, or we can fight on all fronts.
Right. And we care to fight on all fronts.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we are going to do. Okay. I'm going to move forward now a little faster. Sandy Degg says rightly, they showed us they can pay for what we need without taxing us when they paid, but for the vaccines. And not only for us, they also have sent some of the vaccines to other countries, but not enough vaccines, to other countries. That's one reason why we keep on having these waves, of COVID. They need to get the vaccines to everybody in the world. Yesterday, they needed to do that. We are having Delta now because they failed to do that. There wouldn't be Delta if they licensed the technology to other nations so they could produce the vaccines too. One of the prime places they could have licensed the technology to you was India. That's where Delta came from. That's where the mutation came from. Laura says, also tomorrow I want to remember to share what I know Georgia Davenport has been getting up to. Rather, I would love it if Joseph Firestone would invite her on soon to talk about the ballot initiative trainings she has been doing for organizers in other states. I can invite her on for next week, Laura, and maybe even sooner than that. I don't know. I've been thinking of trying to get on here the Green Party guy who's running in California. Because what goes on in California now is very, very important. If we could somehow get that Green Party candidate into office, if Newsom should fail, we would have somebody as governor of California who would sign a single-payer bill in California. That would be tremendous impetus for the rest of the country, and for Washington. As well. And nobody is looking at this guy Kapelovitz. Nobody is looking at him. He has such a small support number right now. He's only got something like 300 followers on Twitter. We should have a tweet storm to boost this guy up here. Try to light a fire under him. His he had an article in the LA Progressive newsletter. It's called "Dismissing Voter Choice is No Way to Win a Recall Election." It's a very good article. It's bright. You can see that this guy has a brain. You can see he's for the kinds of things that we want. Just from this article alone, you can see that. But you can see it from his platform. There's an article that appeared, okay, in the Los Angeles Times today, criticizing Newsom because he wants voters to ignore the second question on the recall ballot. That second question is critical because if Newsom loses, that's the fail-safe. We have to have a progressive candidate who wins the fail-safe. And Newsom has tried to set it up so that there will be no fail-safe. That is terribly irresponsible from the standpoint of the progressive movement. It is a terrible betrayal of the progressive movement, a terrible betrayal of the people of California, because he is saying to people, me, not us. That is what, in effect, he is saying. Don't vote for anybody on the second question because I think that might possibly endanger me on the first question. That's what he's saying. And he's risking Trumpists taking over California because he's so anxious to save himself. It's really completely reprehensible, and we should all be uniting against this guy to put in the fail-safe so we don't get people who are Neanderthals in control of the governorship in California. Of course, they can be countered by the legislature, but at the same time, we're going to get a single-payer bill through them if one of them takes over. And for a year, the single-payer possibilities are gone. We can't afford that to have that happen to California. We need a tweet storm to try to stop that, Laura. And anyway, let's see. Kay says 50 is way too many states to have to depend on. You don't have to depend on 50 states. It's not about, oh, I see, in terms of depending on those states to get in proper gear to distribute the income. I entirely agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
Entirely agree on that. Laura says, I only support M4A candidates who are doing as much as I am on the organizing front, such as Jason Call. Steve says it's the litmus test. It is the litmus test, absolutely. And Laura Fielding says, Rebecca Parson running in my own district against chair of the New Democrats, Representative Kilmer, is also great. She has endorsed whole Washington. See, we understand the synergy in Washington state, a multi-pronged approach, hashtag FOAF. Okay, so Laura, who's running in the Washington 10th this year? I remember a candidate came by the name of Tambourine Borelli, was running in that area in 2018.
I don't know which is the 10th, but Laura, I'm sure would.
I'm sure Laura would know. She was a wonderful candidate. I wish that she had run. She was for everything we were for. Saying that we need people that can't be bought, okay, or bullied. Absolutely. And
you need a president.
Yeah, we need a president that we can count on. We sure do. And Amber says, really, really appreciate this lovely lady. I hope Joe will have her and other RBWW reps on. Just great people.
Thank you.
I will, Amber. I'm going to do a lot of that.
I think we're going to meet a lot of other people too.
I think so too. I think we're going to meet a lot of other people from this movement.
Oh, I had a great
conversation, Amber.
Jerry, today.
Huh?
I had a fabulous conversation with Sherry today. Excellent.
Yeah, Sherry's a great person. Laura says, thanks, Amber 8K Grigo. I can't say enough words of gratitude to you for helping to push back on efforts to undermine our work. Yes, Amber, and it's time you got on here too.
Yes.
We've been actually negotiating that for some time, Amber. Haven't heard from you lately about it. Okay. Okay, Laura points out that Lisa is in Pennsylvania. Yeah, she's in Allegheny County.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Jeffrey said, I didn't even know her name was Lisa till I met her in person.
Oh, Jeff.
But Jeff Denton, yeah.
Jim Dials was just his Twitter handle, right?
Right.
Yeah, he's fabulous.
Yeah, he is. He's fabulous. He is.
He really is.
Good. He's very, very good. Oh, also, by the way, we put together a counter team, for RP. Okay.
Right.
Amber's on it.
I'm in there.
But so is Jeff. It's really actually a great team. But Sherry was in there for a while, and she was doing a great job, but she just couldn't stand the kind of thing that was going on from the RP people. And Lana said, I heard Richard Ojeda, say earlier that when Manchin's term is over, he will run for West Virginia governor. Yeah, that's been in the air for a long time. Okay, he wants to run for West Virginia governor. And, of course, that's one thing we have to threaten him with. Okay, we have to tell him he's not going to get any party support, any party money when he runs for governor if he doesn't vote, to get rid of the filibuster. That's what Biden has to tell him. Because he wants to run in 2024. Okay, and Biden wants to run, for re-election, as far as we know, in 2024. They're both going to be running at the same time. Manchin is going to need Biden's support. And he's going to need some money also from the DSCC because he may be running against Jim Justice again. I mean, that could well happen. And Jim Justice is going to be at least as formidable as Joe Manchin in that state. And Laura says, and she lives many years in Washington State. So she has firsthand knowledge about our politics. She lived, I think what you're talking about, is Tamborine Borelli, right?
No, she's talking about me. I lived in Washington State for 19 years, and then I moved back to Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from originally.
Ah, so
I was like going back 35 years in time from a political standpoint. The politics just blew. I mean, I just was like, oh my God, I forgot what it's like here.
Oh, God.
Oh,
that's awful. That's really awful.
That's okay because we're going to come through it.
Oh, I hope you come through it soon.
We're going to have to, or I'm moving back to Washington.
I think the East Coast really needs Pennsylvania to come through it. Quick.
Well, I sent you that article last night, Joe. You see that Connor Lamb is going to run for Senate.
Right.
Which basically vacates his district from a congressional standpoint, putting it on the chopping block for the one district in the country that's going to have to go, or in the state that's going to have to go away because we're losing a congressional seat.
Right. And so that's probably going to be the congressional seat that you lose. Okay. If he does run for the Senate. Okay. But what are his chances?
Against John Fetterman? I'm hoping they're not good, but I think we're going to have another situation like we saw with Nina Turner. They're just going to flood all kinds of money at him. Because Fetterman, although he is not a Medicare for All supporter, not full-throated and blah, 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 he innuendos, but he's not. But everything else about John Fetterman that he's done as lieutenant governor here
has been good.
It's been good, but I have to say now, we've got a situation like I was talking about before where we have a lot of energy that is coming out of Pennsylvania, right? You're going to have a lot of money behind energy. We have huge ACO, MCO, insurance, healthcare provider crap coming out of here, right? You're talking about all the big money. You got big pharma here. You do have tech here, though. You do have some tech here. But what you also have are people that are really solid, hardworking people who just want to see their kids do better. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to organize and make sure we could just please help me get John Fetterman elected, guys. That's just really, I'm going to beg you. I'm going to beg you because we don't want Connor Lamb to replace Patrick Toomey. For Christ's sake, help me.
I know that would be awful. That would be a disaster.
That would be Joe Manchin on steroids, only younger.
Yeah, right. And there for a longer time. You would be electing another Joe Manchin.
Oh, worse. Worse.
And Laura says, yes, it does. It definitely includes direct democracy, a ballot initiative. It also includes the knitting needles and people with incredible policy knowledge, like Fiddy. I don't know if I know who Fiddy is. Who's
That's
Fiddy?
what they used to call me years ago, Fiddy.
Oh, Fiddy. Okay. We look forward to sharing knowledge pool about MMT, but only from those with a hashtag philosophy. Fight on all fronts. Indeed. Amber says, even if they pass the funds for healthcare, that doesn't train the workers and medical staff we need. We currently have a huge hole in our employment numbers. Indy Left says, hi, Lisa and Joe. Evelina says, look stylish, Lisa. Laura says, thank you, Lisa, for the red beret you crocheted for me. I love it. Does everyone know that Lisa crochets as well as knowing her shit on policy?
Not as well as Laura crochets and knows her shit about organizing.
Okay, so I guess we're just about all done. Okay. I think it's time to say goodnight, except Bonnie wants to ask a question.
What month is her birthday?
So Bonnie would like to know the month of your birthday, Lisa.
December. I'm a Sagittarius.
Okay, December, a Sagittarius. Okay. Okay, so.
Thank you. Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
If you're still reading through comments, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I just want to tell you sincerely from the bottom of my heart, this is wonderful discussion with you, and I thank you. And I thank you for being that voice that was caring enough to say, hey, let's talk about this from a perspective, you know, when we started getting attacked from the state single payer side from folks that just totally were like, that's not a way to do it because states are not currency issuers. You jumped right in like the professor that you are and sat down with us and went through it. And you were just like, no, this makes sense. This makes sense. And like, you not only did you like give us a home from the standpoint of being able to help us and talk with us, but you gave us depth that we didn't have before. You gave us resources. Myself bouncing things off of you is amazing, and it's wonderful to have you with us. So I'm thanking you.
Okay, thank you very much. But I'm gonna, or I should say, you are very welcome. But I'm gonna thank you very much for doing something for me, okay, and that is for showing me that there is a movement that I can be at home with. That's what you've done for me. Because I have an activist side. I've been an activist from time to time, you know, at various times. I've tried to put some activism into the MMT work and have succeeded, okay, to some degree. But I haven't found a movement that I can put my whole commitment to till I ran across this movement, the Red Berets Movement. And so
Thank
I
you,
need
Joe.
to thank you for that.
Thank you, Joe.
And you too, Laura.
Hey, Bonnie, thank you for lending us to him, or lending him to us.
Would you like to say something back?
I can't, I didn't
She's
understand.
Stacy.
I have a hearing problem, Howard.
But she thanked you for lending me
Oh,
to them.
sure. Anytime.
Anytime, get him out of here.
He's a sweetheart. You're gonna
Yes,
have
he
to fight
is.
for him.
He is.
Okay, so thank you all for coming, and but thank you all for the great attitude through the whole thing. It was fantastic, and I think we both enjoyed it really tremendously.
I did, and I always learn a lot from you, Joe.
So we are going to say goodnight. Oh, and by the way, I learned all kinds of things also from you about politics in Pennsylvania, okay, in Washington, and also your financial perspectives. You have practical financial perspectives that, as someone who's half an economist and half a political scientist, I don't have. So, thank you very much.
Anytime.
And Jeff Denton says, thank you so much, Joe. And on that note, we're going to say good night, and we'll see you tomorrow night for Laura Fielding.
Yay. Thank you, everybody, for watching. 50 lines only on Twitter. 50 lines only.
At 50 lines only. Right. At 50 lines only. Steve says, I want a red beret. So Laura can certainly tell you how to get one. Okay, I think Lisa can tell you how to get one also, but I think that Laura will specialize in that.
Just go to wholewashington.org, and you have a menu there, and you can get your berets there.
Okay, thank you. And Jeffrey says, you're not getting mine, Wolfie. Okay, good night, folks.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you again, Dr. Joe.
Okay, we'll see you tomorrow night.
Theo.